Iguala, gracias por seguir estos contenidos, pero te agradezco si le das suscribirte y a la manito, y si además quiere comentar, mucho mejor.
Good evening. Today is August the 29th of 2023. This is 9:15 p.m. And today we are running Sincericidio with Mr. Abel Carvajal. Today we have an interesting conversation because we're going to try to put in context what has happened in the last week, especially after the supposedly debate between the GOP candidates there in Milwaukee and what happened with the new way of communicating between the humans. That is what happened in the X platform with the interview of Tucker Carlson and Mr. Trump. That by this time, that interview has been seen by more than 260 million people. And that is something. And who can get close to that? So what really Tucker, Elon, and Mr. Trump did is shove in the face a big glove of grease to everybody, because they really kick it out of the park. And that was something. 262 million by the count at this moment. That's amazing. Especially because of the message. Even though Mr. Trump is being part of a witch hunt where you have a whole bunch of rabid wolves and hyenas trying to get him, the guy's still on the subject, that is employment, money, energy, and stop the inflation and try to make your country great again. So I wanted to hear what you might want to say, Mr. Abel. Go ahead.
Well, Wednesday of last week, the Republican Party sanctioned its very first presidential debate. There were 8 participants, but the most important candidate in this race, the one who's ahead with 53% of the support in the average of polls, was not present, and that was Donald Trump. Between the two main competitors to the former president in this primary, Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy, there are 20% support. In other words, the president has a 53-13 advantage over DeSantis, a 53-7 advantage over Ramaswamy. And when you combine the support in the polling aggregate of all the other candidates not named Donald Trump, they get to 35%. So there's about a 15 to 20% element of the Republican Party that is still undecided, but Donald Trump is above 50%. In politics, by and large, being over 50% means you win. You have more people than anybody else could get combined. This primary election that we are about to have in a few months isn't much of an election, much of a contest. It appears very clear to me that Donald Trump is on a clear collision course with the nomination. And more likely than not, he will have a good chance of winning the 24 election. I'll tell you, he is stronger now in the polls in terms of his campaign now in 2023 than he was 4 years ago in 2019 when he was running for re-election. He's polling ahead of Biden in some national polls, which is unprecedented for a Republican. No Republican has won the nationwide vote in this country since 2004. That being said, things have changed. New York is no longer as democratic as it used to be. Texas has moved a little bit into a more purple state status. but Florida has moved drastically to the right. And the fact that Florida and Texas are still solidly Republican states, they're about 7 to 12-point margins, and New York may not be a 20-point margin. It looks like the Republicans might win the popular vote in national elections, or at least they can compete for it more than they have in the past because of the realignment. But, and I get it, we have the Electoral College. That's how we elect the president. We elect them on a state-by-state basis. Each state has individual points. But looking at it from the perspective of where Trump is standing, he's in a far stronger position electorally right now than he was 4 years ago. And that says a lot, because a lot has happened in the last 4 years. He went through an election. He's been the subject of wide-scale legal investigations. He's been indicted 4 times. It seems like every powerful interest is against him, and yet he's running ahead of Biden, and by a substantial amount in some cases, by 3-4 points. He's in a position of strength that he's never been as a candidate ever since 2015 when he first ran. He's stronger now than he's ever been, and he's getting closer to the magic number, which I think is about 48% of the vote nationally. Because once Trump reaches 48% of the vote nationally, it will mean that he will be over the top in a lot of these states in the Midwest and in the South that voted for him in 2016, didn't vote for him in 2020. That's the subject of discussion. But these were states that he counted on back then, didn't have him in 2020. And that would put him over the top if he got to 48% nationally, and he's getting there, which would show that he's pretty much right now the favorite to win.
Well, but there are some other things that I think we have to comment today to what happened last week. The guy showed up at Fulton County Jail.
Yeah.
They got his mouth shut. They thought they were going to get a loser, with a sad face. And the guy put on a Clint Eastwood face, a very badass dude. And then
the favorite one was Jenna Ellis, though. She was smiling.
Yeah. So the thing is, the way they put the light on the picture, they thought they were going to diminish the guy, and then he came on top of it. And the picture was so great that the guy published for a return on Twitter. So that was amazing, because the guy has above 85 million followers just on Twitter to see his picture, first thing. The other one is that I've seen comments on different sets of Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, Rumble, that there's a big support in the Black community over Mr. Trump. So there are people saying that the Blacks, they keep voting 95% for Democrats.
Right.
They think that the vote turnout will be like 20% or above for Mr. Trump. And if he gets the color community vote just to turn to 20%, the election is over. Because many people are saying that the guy is going to turn like Tupac Shakur. When they got out of jail, he sold like 20 million albums. So that's what many people are thinking, that, now the guy's from the hood because he has gone to wherever many in the Black community go, and then they feel the guy is part of them, part of the hood. So that has been a very interesting theme that I've been seeing this last week.
Well, with regards to the Black electorate, for generations, the African-American population in the U.S., especially in the South, places like Georgia, places like North Carolina, places like Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, have voted Democratic, and in the South, it's a high margin. Now, the primary distribution of African Americans is in the South, because if we go back in history, a good number of African Americans trace their ancestry back to this hemisphere to having their ancestors been brought against their will as slaves. And after the Civil War, the slavery was abolished, but there was still widespread political violence in the South. There was widespread extrajudicial murders. I mean, I don't want to get this demonetized, but it was very bad. You had terrorist organizations like the Ku Klux Klan that would do all sorts of crimes against humanity. That's how I would describe it towards the African American population. So at the turn of the century, as there were more industrial opportunities in the Midwest, African Americans began to consolidate into these new industrial centers like St. Louis, Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, to some degree, New York. And that's why you see a very strong African American presence in these cities. Although in recent decades, as labor laws have changed, as the flow of the economy has come south, there's been more opportunities in the Sun Belt or the South. And the amount of racial violence has considerably decreased in the past 60 years. There's been lots of strides made towards the equality and towards the reconciliation of all of America's racial groups, but particularly there is now a difference when it comes to racism. Racism is no longer tolerated or even an accepted practice. It is something that's bad. And in the 60s and prior to the 1960s, there were openly racist people who held positions of power in the South. But the importance of the Black vote is that the Democrats will carry it overwhelmingly, 95%, 90%. The record actually does not belong to Obama. It belongs to Hubert Humphrey. In 1968, he won 97% of the Black vote compared to Richard Nixon's 2%. Obama carried 94% to McCain's 4% in 2008. But Donald Trump performed at 12% in 2020. And it's important to realize that 2020 was a very, very, very contentious situation, especially when it came to race relations, because of what happened with George Floyd and all the protests that broke out. There was a large-scale mobilization on the part of left-wing elements to convince Black voters to go vote and vote for the Democrats. But prior to that situation, Trump counted on with about 20 to 25% of the Black vote, which is truly unprecedented. What's interesting to see is that actually the more young generation of African Americans who tend to be more secular, who tend to now be part of this new society that has become more open and more colorblind, as opposed to the society of the 1960s, which was segregated, and African Americans who are over 65 grew up in a segregated country. What's interesting to see is that this younger generation is more open to conservatism. It's still overwhelmingly Democrat, but younger African Americans have begun to vote Republican in larger numbers than their grandparents and parents have. One interesting factor is just that, and actually the biggest growth between 2016 and 2020 for Donald Trump in terms of electorate was young millennials, 30 to 40-year-olds especially, that are of color, Hispanics as well. Now, Hispanics have trended to the right for different reasons. As the Republican Party's moved in a more populist direction and a more conservative position, especially on social issues, we have to account that Hispanics are a very Catholic group of people. And the immigration issue has also behaved in a way that has caused Hispanics to behave politically in a way that people didn't expect. The expectation was, as Republicans took a hard line on immigration, they'd lose the Hispanic vote. That has not been the case. Hispanics, we understand more than anybody what these open border policies mean for our communities, and the damage that it can cause. But with African Americans in particular, it is very possible that Trump performs at 20% or better. And that would be a game changer. That would move Atlanta, Raleigh, Charlotte, Milwaukee, Detroit, Philadelphia, to a smaller degree, Pittsburgh. All of these are major centers in these electoral battlegrounds, even Minneapolis in Minnesota. All of these are major electoral centers in the key battleground states. And it's very, very possible that 20% for Donald Trump in these places would be enough to get him over the top in these competitive swing states. Definitely, if Trump pulled 20% of the black vote in Georgia, he would win the state. And realistically, Trump's path to the White House runs through Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Those three states are his easiest path to the White House. And it seems to me that he could certainly get there by boosting the black vote. And what do black voters want to hear? Well, they want to hear the economy. They want to hear about public safety.
Jobs.
Jobs.
That's the real deal.
And really, it's been an uphill climb, right? Because the best performance with black voters for any Republican nominee since the 1960s was with Bob Dole. And Bob Dole scored 15% of the black vote, which doesn't seem like a lot. But considering that he was pummeled by Bill Clinton, 15% when you get 40% nationally was very impressive. And that has a lot to do with his running mate, Jack Kemp, who did a very good effort into this idea of opportunity zones, that we would go into black communities and make it easier for people to build jobs, make it easier for technical education to be taking place, ensure public safety. That was a big concern. And so
one of the thing is that after the debate, one of the best performance was Senator Tim Scott, because the guy played safe. He didn't get too much. What?
I disagree. I thought Tim Scott had a weak debate. Looking from it, he's somebody who needed to have a bigger presence on stage. He had the third least amount of speaking time out of the 8 candidates. Ramaswamy and DeSantis dominated that debate. Nikki Haley had a great performance. Tim Scott.
Yeah, but the guy who got more time was Pence, and everybody thought he was a dud. So I think in order for a future ticket, Mr. Tim Scott, I think, did very well, because he played safe. He went with his points. He didn't want to be in an UFC octagon. So I think he played safe for a future contest, because the real deal was to be on camera and wait what was the metrics of the interview of Tucker Carlson and Mr. Trump.
Well, the other thing that you have to factor in is that Tim Scott will qualify for future debates more likely than not. He's polling at 3%, which should be enough for him to make future debates. I do think that the RNC should look to increasing these requirements to get on stage. 1% of the vote it's good to get people on stage early, give them a chance. You never know what they can do. Carly Fiorina was a candidate that, for instance, rose very quickly after performing well in a debate. Ted Cruz did very well in the debates, and he climbed from 6% to being the runner-up. So debates matter. I understand giving everybody a chance, but I do think that as time goes on, the RNC is going to probably make it harder for people to get on debates, which I think is good policy. I don't think Doug Burgum should have been on stage. I don't think that that Asa Hutchinson should have been on stage. And Francis Suarez wanted to be on stage. But Francis Suarez is polling at less than 1%. He just dropped out earlier today. Good riddance from the race. I mean, he wasn't going to go anywhere. He's got to figure out a lot of stuff down here too. With some of his
and then they had a pit bull on the stage that was Mr. Christie, that he was there just to bark against Trump, but since Trump didn't show up, then he tried to bark against Ramaswamy. That I think the guy took, a lot of advantage that everybody was trying to hit on him. So he got a very good position, but I think not enough to go above Mr. DeSantis or to get even closer to Mr. Trump. But
the issue with Ramaswamy is that with Vivek, what policy difference, if he's running to win, and it's very clear to me that he's not running to win this nomination, at least now. The issue with Vivek is that what difference is there? If you want Trump, why would you vote for the middleman, right? What qualities does Vivek have that Trump doesn't have, that he's more electable? I don't think that's the case. People don't know besides the Republican electorate who Vivek Ramaswamy is. He's not more electable than Trump. His policies are a mixture of this anti-woke culture warism, and then some economic policies that are in line with the new generation of conservatives that I think I've discussed in the past, like J.D. Vance and Katie Britt and the Peter Thiel group. But Vivek isn't going to be the nominee. If anything, I mean, I think he might be taking votes away from Trump, because the people who would vote for Vivek aren't going to vote for DeSantis. At least the way that I see it, they're not fighting over the same electorate. The thing is that in the Republican Party, you have different coalitions. You have the social conservatives, you have the socially liberal, but they live on the coast, but they're very economically conservative. They're mostly seen in New York and in the East Coast. This is the old, dominating wing of the Republican Party. They're more to the center, but they were with Trump. And you would think, Trump very much is a creation of that Northeastern old school Republican Rockefeller types who were more to the center. And Trump has evolved in a more populist direction. You combine some Tea Party with that and you get Donald Trump. But Trump's roots are in the more centrist wing of the Republican Party, and that section isn't going to defect from him. The other section that you have are the Never Trumpers, and that's a small wing of the party. You're looking at 20% at most, but that's a very divided field. You have Pence, who in any normal cycle, Mike Pence would have had a great argument to be a social conservative candidate because he objectively is the most socially conservative candidate on stage. But his campaign has been an anti-Trump battle. And so the way that I see things is if anybody's going to stop Trump, they have to drop out of the race and back one candidate. Right now, that looks like Nikki Haley. If this race, the way that it would turn out is that you would have 4 candidates left in the race. It would be Trump, DeSantis, Ramaswamy, and Haley. And the best bet for Haley is that everybody else backs her. And I don't even think that would amount to 25% of the vote, which would certainly not be enough to win the nomination. So it's not looking good for the more establishment wing, at least for now. And Trump just has dominated this cycle. He's got the incumbency advantage. He is very much the face of the party, and he's going to be the nominee. I don't think.
The other thing is that the rest of the guys are considered part of the swamp. So that's basically what many of the people hate. But the other news that I think it was interesting last week is this coalition of the BRICS, because they think that if you unite the Chinese, the Brazilians, the Russians, the Indians, and the South Africans, and now they're going to put Argentina, and they want to get Maduro, and they want to get all. So it looks more like a coalition of socialist countries than the BRICS. So are they uniting?
It's the new Socialist International.
Yeah, but are they uniting for business or just for politics? So I think when you want to show up with a coalition, and instead of doing business, you're just gonna, bullshit people with your socialist agenda, that it goes straight to the toilet. Especially because there's many people that they don't get the numbers correctly. For instance, I was talking to a good friend of mine, the Oracle, and he was telling me that people say, well, the United States has a debt of 33 trillion. Fine. But how much is the funds for the retirements of the US population? It's about 40 trillion. So that's one number. And then you have the Social Security, that is another pot. And then you have the regular open market, that is another pot. So these people, who wants to trade a Benjamin for a Mao Zedong bill? That's the kicker. Who wants to change a Benjamin for, the Brazilian currency, or for the South African currency, or for the Indian rupee? Who wants to do that? But the press are pulling so hard, saying that the BRICS is the real deal. Come on. If you add up all the money of the military complex of all these countries, they only make like $350 billion a year. The Pentagon budget is about $800 billion a year. So come on, give me a break.
I would note this about the BRICS. China's not the pony to bet on when it comes to international affairs. China is going to diminish in its importance. They are going to have their population halve by the end of the century. They're going to go from 1.4 trillion to 700 million. China's dominance is going to fade in a lot of these areas. America, for all of its issues and for all of its concerns, is very much still the right horse that you can bet on. It's a country that's growing in population. It's a country that has a very diverse economy, a country with very diverse talents in terms of its industries, in terms of its natural resources, in terms of its strength. China just isn't that horse to bet on anymore. America may be divided, but at the end of the day, this is a very strong country and we are a really resilient people. Whereas with China, there's just no telling because they haven't fought a war in the outside of the country in a long time. I mean, they haven't fought a war against a hostile power since Korea or even Vietnam when they tried to invade it. And they failed spectacularly. They had border skirmishes with India. And let me mention India for a second. India, yes, is certainly a rising power. They're going to continue to increase in population. They're the world's largest country by population. They're going to have a growth in economy, a growth in cultural influence. The largest YouTube channel is T-Series, a Bollywood record label. So, you know, India certainly is positioned to have greater soft power, and the Indian diaspora all over the world has gone on and doing great things. You have the Prime Minister of England is of Indian heritage, and Nikki Haley, who could very well end up in a senior position in government or even end up as president in the future, is Indian. So Vivek Ramaswamy, another Indian American. So you have greater cultural power, greater soft power with India. But India and China don't get along. And there's border skirmishes between the two. India and China each hold land that the other claims. So to me, it doesn't seem that these countries are going to get along great. That leaves Brazil. Brazil is a change of administration moving away from this coalition of the global South, as they would probably call it, and moving back into the Western world. Bolsonaro would not be pro-BRICS. South Africa is a country that's on the verge of becoming a failed state. I mean, we don't talk about South Africa that much, but the African National Congress, which has run the country since the end of apartheid, since Nelson Mandela became
basically
president.
A communist country. It's basically a communist party.
They're on the verge of collapsing.
Yeah.
The ANC is no longer polling in majority. It's very likely that the ANC could retain power with the support of open communists who have espoused genocidal rhetoric towards white South Africans. That is not an exaggeration. You can look up Julius Malema. These people dress up like red Power Rangers when they go to these meetings. They're a very dangerous organization, the Economic Freedom Fighters. And Julius Malema has openly called for revolution in South Africa, which would be tremendously dangerous. But there's also the specter of separatism in parts of South Africa. Cape Town, for instance, which is a region along the coast, has talked about separating from the rest of the Union. So South Africa is also not a pony to bet on because it's an unstable country. And that leaves, so we covered Brazil, we covered...
and you go to Saudi Arabia. But
Saudi Arabia is going to dry out. I mean, once they run out of oil, there's a joke in Saudi Arabia that some businessman made. My grandfather rode camels. I drive Mercedes-Benz, and my grandchildren will ride camels. because the country's built on oil, and that oil is going to run out eventually. By 2100, I highly doubt that there'll be much oil left in Saudi Arabia to exploit anymore. Oil is a finite resource. As much as, you know, I do support the fossil fuel industry to power our economy, it is by far the most efficient way of powering it. There is a finite amount of oil in this world, and Saudi Arabia is going to run out of that eventually. And who the hell would want to do business with Saudi Arabia in the future? So another country that it isn't to be bet on. And so that leaves BRICS, you know, Brazil, a country that could go either way.
And then you have Russia. Basically, many of those countries are buying cheap oil from Russia.
But Russia's another failed state. I mean, Russia's probably a year away from this humiliation that they've faced in Ukraine, culminating in them losing everything. Russia's on the verge of total collapse. There's, you know, that's the situation within the country. There will be separatist sentiment within these republics that they have, especially because the vast majority of the people who've been sent to this war in Ukraine have been from these republics. They've taken people from Siberia, from these ethnic groups, the Burats, the Chechens are another group. What's this other group? The Tatars. They have been sent systematically to Ukraine. And the larger amount of body bags that are returning to Russia from Ukraine have been from these regions, you know,
satellite regions. They will go from Moscow, so they're saving the Muscovites, and people will get pissed very soon.
And so Russia's falling apart. Russia's on the verge of total collapse. Brazil is unstable in terms of its politics because it's one election from changing total directions. India is a growing power, but India still has a lot of problems internally that they have to fix. And India is not really in any position to seriously challenge the United States, nor is there a need. You know, India is a functioning democracy. It's a large country. They're part of the English-speaking world. There's not really an existential situation between the US and India as there is with China or with Russia, which are completely divergent civilizations. You have China, which is another country that's in decline, and South Africa, which is on the verge of becoming a failed state. And so you talk about Venezuela. Venezuela is the country with the highest rate of inflation on earth, or one of the countries with highest rate of inflation. It's, you know, as you know, because you live there, it's falling apart. It's in collapse.
This is a failed state, and now
and Argentina might change directions too.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, here they elected a new electoral authority, but it's more of the same crap. Now they got the guy who got out some of the candidates of the race because the guy is the controller in charge. Now he's the boss of the electoral system. But what the heck? I mean, we are a joke now. We hope that by October the 23rd, Mrs. Machado is elected the leader of the country. But one of the problems that she's having is that the message is not on point, because the message is get jobs, produce a lot of energy, and get off the rule of communist law brought by the Cuban castristas. And that's one of the things that is not being spoken in the political arena in Venezuela. I don't know. I guess that one of the problems is that here you cannot say everything you think, because the communists, they got the foot on your face. That's a reality. But the thing is that probably she's not dealing with the real message, that is how to get jobs and how to produce energy and how to open the borders for commerce, for trade, to get off so many taxes. And since it's not spoken as a message, how come are you going to get 10 or more million jobs in this country that is all destroyed by this communist regime for the last 24 years? And how are you going to get the jobs? It's not being spoken in the electoral arena. There is only giving hope. But I remember a guy from your country that talked about hope, and it changed it to a shithole. So the thing is here, there's a lot of hope, but there's no real message. So I think that's one of the problems we're having now.
I think any movement that
You have
is
30 seconds, my friend.
that's directed at fixing the situation in Venezuela and repairing the country from the harm that has been done. And some of the harm is irreparable. That's certainly the case of Cuba. As the longer the regime's in power, the harder it is to reverse things. And it's very possible that you can't reverse some of the things. But Venezuela has a great potential. They have oil. They have a large population pool. They're one of the most educated countries in the region. They have a history of being one of the richest countries, if not the richest country in Latin America. There's a lot that can be done in Venezuela, and with the help of outside investment, it's a good investment to make in a free and prosperous Venezuela. There is hope, right? There is opportunity. There is a roadmap forward.
I have to let you go, my friend.
You have to cost it, and you have to think about it well. I know we're running low on time, but it is certainly doable. It's just a question of analyzing what you've got and what worked before.
Bollitos de corazón a 2.500 el paquete, hallacas de pollo a 2.500 cada una. A la orden los bollitos de mazorca a 2.500 el paquete, bollitos de corazón.